So this is the Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee meeting. Tonight there are 4 topics on the agenda. The first is going to be a review of open items or things that needed follow-up from the third quarter financial analysis that we performed. The second was a general comment called Understanding TIFs. Sorry guys, we're gonna wait a second. We have a few speakers, some live, some who will be zoomed in, will help us in doing just that, understanding, I guess, TIFs. We see a lot of these come up for our city. In particular, there was talk of 2 instances that may become pertinent here in a few months. So we just wanted to give ourselves as a committee, council, and residents a little bit better of understanding of how that might operate. Third, it's called claims process. We actually, as a committee, started this conversation as one of the early agenda items back in the first quarter. And these are claims against the city. Typically, we had our law department bring claims for us for review and just say, what's the exposure that the city is facing? And so this was an opportunity for us to continue what we started. Admittedly, I think the foot was off the gas a little bit into the spring and summer for maybe obvious reasons, but it's time to put that back in the front, to the forefront. So Tim Gary's going to come help us talk about that. And lastly is a discussion around next steps for RETA. We got some feedback. I can talk about what we received via the president of council, and then just what should those next steps be. We as a committee potentially bring forward to council and the administration to either move forward with RETA or decide not to. So with that, we'll start with the first agenda item, review of open items from the third quarter financial analysis. So there were 5 items that we weren't able to address ourselves or using the financial reports that we had, and we needed further clarification. So Jim Stith, our auditor, said he would kind of help with some of those open items, and then he also had a financial update that he can provide at the end of this. I'll try to read some of the comments that I had from the committee just to refresh us, and then if you need any more follow-up, you can kind of answer as best you can, okay? So the first one, it was on the revenue report. It was the description, interest earned, Star, Ohio. The treasurer indicated when he was here that this was interest earned to date, and it could be even better leveraged with a cash plan by month. If an outlook of expected cash was available for investment in any particular month and was provided to the treasurer, there could be potential to maximize investments. I guess that's less of a question, more of hoping there's a comment, if there is any, about a cash planning.
Yes, we do cash planning. We have for several years that show our cash balance at the end of each month and the projected cash balance in a 12-month period. So that is available if they would request it. I'd be happy to provide it.
Maybe that's it. Maybe they're just not making the connection. So if there's something maybe your team could be letting the treasurer know.
Yes. And it's in this published material that's been given to this committee in the past on a regular basis, as well as what I have here today.
The next is Health Department Grant Fund. Discussion around the Health Department expects the general fund to reduce 2021 revenue figures, but also equally reduce health commissioner fees.
That is correct. And if you look at the financial reports that were emailed to each member of council just a few days ago when we closed out September, if you look at the revenue report, you'll notice that on page 1, a number of the keys showing monthly revenue for those health department keys are now significantly negative. And what we did was we backed out all the revenue from the general fund that dealt with the health department and moved all of that revenue back to January 1st into Fund 55, which is the Board of Health Fund. And then that's utilized to pay for their health commissioner, as well as their general expenses of operating their materials and supplies, gas and electric, things like that. The relationship between the health department and the city now is that of an accountant from my office's standpoint and also a landlord in the extent that they're utilizing the space for the city, essentially at a 0% lease, and they are responsible for their daily operating expenses within that fund. Eventually, the city will have to supply a grant to help support the health department on an annual basis. However, this is not anticipated as being required for 2021 because we did back out all of their revenue back to January 1st, and their significant expenditure, which is that of the salary of the health commissioner, didn't start until July. So they'll have a positive carryover this year, they'll have a positive carryover in 2021. We'll have to discuss in 22 and 23 when we would have to start supplementing that.
Just 1 second, please. Thanks. The third item from the revenue report said state grants water. In particular, the name was I was trying to make sure that I had the proper codification. On page 20 of the revenue report, it was hard to determine where $5.115 million should sit. We talked about, James and I, if this was water meters or what that was related to. Is hard to just tell, and I didn't know if it was just the way it was classified or codified, and could you comment?
That is water meter sales. That
water
is
meter
the revenue that we come in from people using the water in the city. Under the old software, each revenue key has a sub-key. Each one of those sub-keys then has a title. So somewhere else in another fund, it said state grant, and that just carries over to the title on this one. To go in and change that at this point wouldn't make any sense because we're upgrading our software and should be on the new system by the end of November, in which case it'll be much clearer and more friendly.
Okay, we'll leave it. The next is not for you, but just for the public. We saw in the expense report under drug law enforcement, there was a balance, and it had I had the email here. 1 second here. Plus $20,000 that was thought to be built up from seizures, et cetera. We discussed whether there was an opportunity for that to be used for community relationships if not already budgeted. Chief Kramer actually responded and said Fund 11, where seizure money comes from, has an agreement with the DEA, and it's typically for small protection purchases for the police, but he is more than willing and open to be using some or all of that for community relations. So it's just worth noting for this council that as we look at that expense report, if we see that being, either unutilized for the rest of the year or planning through 2021, it's not a nothing portion of money. And then maybe we can discuss, we heard from other parts of the committee or other committees, kind of a growing need to build up community relations, and maybe there's an opportunity to utilize some of that funds. So it's just worth pointing out that they're somewhat unearmarked, or if they are, the chief is willing to try to use them for something else. So I think there's an opportunity there. I just wanted to kind of let us know. The last item, capital improvements. We were trying to figure out how to classify remaining projects. We discussed what projects we knew about, or any of the large ones, roof and windows at City Hall, et cetera, but we were trying to set expectations for what might be rolled over. This was made before we got an email from you about kind of the capital improvements that we expect to see as the first draft of the plan, but didn't know if you wanted to comment any further than what we got.
So the mayor and I have been working on the new fiscal emergency plan, which includes payroll and projections. We've received budgets requests from pretty much every department. We've included all of those into the new FRP for the beginning of next year. And a big area of that is looking at capital improvements. Obviously, with COVID-19 greatly impeding the amount of work that we can have done just because of businesses being closed, we weren't able to complete everything on the list that we wanted to have done this year. When I say we, I mean the city. But we started looking and saying, well, what are the projects we have done? What are the ones that we anticipate we can get done this year? And what are the ones we need to roll over? And so we've been working on that capital plan and looking and rolling these things over. And that's something that we are actively working on. I did send the updated kind of list to you probably after your meeting. And I was just talking to Mr. Kelch. I'm going to be forwarding him copies of it too, because we need some input on the different parks projects that the Parks and Recreation Committee would like to have done. So we're communicating on that. Obviously, all the things on that list, there are some things that when we got into it, the city realized that we wouldn't have to totally replace something, that other repairs can be made. And so those things kind of got shifted to other expenditures that came up. But we've got a kind of a detailed list, different columns. Here's what we had planned on. Here's what we did. Here's what we're pushing forward to next year. Here's all the new stuff we did too. So that is something that's available. It is not final because they're looking and working on projects now, but that will be part of the new fiscal recovery plan. There is a pretty good likelihood that we need to pass a new FRP before the end of this year. So we're really looking in December, passing another 5-year plan, as opposed to waiting till next March. And the major driving factor in that is the issue with the separation of the health department from the city, and them now being the Board of Health, and pulling all of that revenue out of the general fund as well as some of their expenses, and reclassifying the expenses within the personnel of the health department that's managed by the city and then supplied to the health department or Board of Health.
Thanks for that. Do you want to segue into the report that you presented to the council?
If we could, there's a letter that's a good page and a half. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You guys can kind of read through, but it is a financial update for the month ending September 30th, 2020. Some key points. There's sections in here that specifically talk about an upcoming change to appropriations, probably on your October 20th meeting or the November 10th meeting. Most of those appropriation changes deal specifically with changes to the certificate of estimated resources based upon revenue that's been realized through property tax and is now being reported. Our TIF funds, our special assessment funds, we now know how much revenue actually came in for those. So we need to adjust the appropriations to match what the revenue actually is. That's the bulk of what's going to be there, but it may be several funds that will be changed. None of those are in the fiscal emergency plan. I did supply the statement of cash position for all funds. That was also in your packet that's sent electronically to you, but there is a copy in this. And I have a cash summary plan, a cash summary analysis for the month ending September 30th, 2020. It looks like this. If you look at it down the middle, you'll see revenue and expenses and then totals at the bottom. To the left of the middle, those are your September actual revenues for each one of the major keys in the general fund, the September budgeted revenues that we expected, the variances between the two, and what percentage that equates to. To the right of the center then, you've got your year-to-date actual revenue for each major key, year-to-date budgeted amount, variance, the remaining budget or collections that we expect, and what the total budget was at the beginning of the year for each one of those major keys. Below the center of the page, you see expenses. Now in the general fund, I just broke it out into personnel-related expenses and everything else. So you'll see what our expenses were for September versus budgeted, variances, and then to the right, year-to-date totals. Most important thing, right of the center to the bottom of the page, year-to-date net revenue over or under expenses, how our revenue has come in higher than our expenses to this point, what our beginning cash balance was, our ending cash balance, the encumbrances, and then the ending unencumbered balance. You'll see the budgeted amount in the next column, and the variances between the two are listed there. So a couple important things to realize is in September, our revenues were significantly higher than our expenditures. So when you look at this and you see that we brought in all these extra revenues, that's because this is the month that we got our property taxes. Those only come in twice a year. So you're going to see a spike in revenue in September that is not going to carry through the rest of the year. Our expenses this month were pretty much average. However, in October is a 3 payroll month because we're on a 26 payroll year. There are 2 months that are triple payrolls. So October's expenses will be significantly higher, and the expenses in October are expected to exceed what our revenues are for that month. However, to this point, we are overall under budget, which is good. A lot of the reason we are under budget, or some of the reason is, number one, those capital projects that we expected to be done this summer that are either pushed back to the fall or early winter because of the state that we're all in. The other reason is we did receive grant money from the CARES Act, our COVID relief fund, and where we had earlier in the year closed City Hall and sent employees home, and where we had overtime related to COVID, mostly in the health department, some in the police, some in the fire, those expenditures were allowed to be paid out of this fund. Therefore, we reversed the expense within the general fund and put it into the COVID fund and utilized the money there. So you'll see a decrease in the actual year-to-date expenses in those departments for payroll related to that. So we're under budget in many areas because of that also. Our revenue year-to-date, where we are, we're about $63,000 under our projected amount at this time, which, given the state of this country, is pretty good. And as I said, we're better off. We've actually got less in our expenditures, so we're doing better from our cash balance. Our current projected December 31st, 2020 cash balance before encumbrances currently is $4.8 million. Now we need at least $1.6 million carryover minimum every year to be able to meet January's expenses. So that's not 4.8 that we can spend. The other caveat to that is so far our earnings tax has been doing well. Actually, our collections year to date are a little bit above where we projected they would be January 1st. However, we're entering the third quarter, and we know a lot of businesses had to shut down over the second and third quarters of this year. So is that loss going to be realized? The initial estimates by the treasurer of being $300,000, $200,000 to $300,000 under the initial projections. Are we going to see that over the next 3 months? And that is something we're watching closely, and it may affect what that balance is at the end of the year. So I hope the balance sheet, the cash summary analysis does help you guys. I do have extras up here if anyone would like one after the meeting. I would like to talk also, we did get a coronavirus relief fund. We have collected year-to-date in that fund $539,764. That money can be used only for very specific items, and they're all being approved by a central office at the Auditor of State. Attachment G that you have is a breakdown of what we've spent so far out of that fund, what is currently encumbered, and if you look on that sheet to the left, personnel expenses $69,000, materials and supplies $25,000, capital improvements $193,000. There's still encumbered another $178,000 for materials and supplies. That means so far expensed or encumbered as of this morning, $466,909. It is the city's intention to spend all of this on the safety and protection of our citizens. Currently, a couple of the departments are looking at additional expenditures to utilize the remaining $72,000 that is left after all of that money is expended. So there is a list if you want to see how that money has been utilized so far.
So I think this is very different than kind of when we met as a general council. I don't know, is that 2 weeks ago? where we were discussing the ambulance. I guess I'm talking to you guys.
Yeah.
We were discussing the ambulance and the fact that even with that purchase, we would still have some leftover throwback. There's a bunch of words that it was me that was saying it. And what I'm hearing now is there's currently would have been a throwback of 72,000, much less, and actually that would go to zero because of the departmental plan that you guys are putting together.
Correct.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it is the city's intention to utilize all of the available monies, buying equipment that is going to help our citizens. And we're working with the health department as well as the fire department and the EMS in expending that. If you look at this list, a number of the items say move from or correction from. What they're talking there is about money that we had spent, like putting up glass shielding in City Hall, and then we got the grant, and then we got to reimburse the general fund and those keys for those expenditures. That's specifically what those are. So when we had equipment we had to buy early in the process, we then were reimbursed from that fund. This will be heavily scrutinized and audited upon its completion. So we are making sure that we are following the letter of the law on this. I did mention before the idea of the VIP program. eGov is going to be upgraded in early November. Many of the departments are already utilizing the sandbox, which is up and running. Once we get to the point that it is installed and operating, all of you guys will be able to log on and see all kinds of things in there. But it's a much more resilient piece of software than the current 1995 version that we're using, and should make the reports much more tolerable. Two other items that I would like to discuss, and then of course I do want to mention there is the general fund monthly revenue by key, earnings tax, actual versus predicted. You'll run a bunch of different charts you guys can look at. You're familiar with what those are. But they should help you kind of analyze what our revenues have been doing. Two things. Number one, the Ohio Public Works Commission, we have a number of OPWC long-term loans that we're repaying. Most of these are 0% interest loans paid over 20 to 30 years. And the payments on these are semi-annual every January and July. And so we've had the money budgeted coming out of funds 2, 5, and 50. And that money's budgeted, it's encumbered. But this year we got to July and the state said, whoa, don't send us any money. COVID, bad stuff. And we explained, well, you know, it's an electronic transfer. You don't actually get paper. And they said, no, we still don't want it. Just wait till we ask for it. And so what they did, we found out yesterday, was they decided that this year they were not going to have any collections for the second payment in July. That they're taking that payment and adding it on to the end of the loan. So now we've actually over appropriated money in those funds for debt service. And even though we offer to pay it now, they don't want it. So they've set new amortization tables, and that will change. It's kind of a headache from an audit standpoint, and from a financial projection standpoint, we're going to have to make some changes. But these only affect those three funds. The other subject, a little sore with the Auditor of State. As you know, the Auditor of State's office is broken into many different departments. We've got LGS, Local Government Services, who are the people you know, April and Anna Mary. You've got the audit branch, who are the people that after we have an outside company perform our audit every year, it goes to them for review. There's another audit branch that apparently looks at special things. Sorry. It's reflux and allergies. So we got an email that said, congratulations, you've been selected randomly to have your pension programs audited. And you'll have to provide us with all this material. They didn't seem to care that it was right at a time we were installing new software and we were in fiscal emergency and we were completing our last audit and trying to do the audit for the new health department the way it's set up. They wanted all this material. And they said, and for the privilege of doing this, you will agree to pay us $895. So we sent them all their material, and over a couple of weeks, they weren't very nice to deal with. Over a few weeks, we provided the material, and they were asking for thousands of pages to be scanned and sent to them electronically. We finally said, you know what, if you guys want this stuff, we'll show you where it is. Come down and pick out the one page you want out of this huge stack of documents. And don't make us spend hours and hours sending you stuff that you're not going to use. Tell us specifically what you're looking for. And while it looks like we're going to pass this audit and we've done everything correctly, they sent a letter of engagement about 2 weeks ago. And it said, it's like a contract that they want me to sign. And the contract says, I agree to have you do all of this for the city. And as the chief financial officer, I agree that you can charge us X amount of dollars per hour with an estimated amount of, initially it said 695, but past that point, additional, they want me to sign something that says I'm going to agree to enter into this relationship with them to pay them something that they're saying I have no choice but to pay. And since it's not in our budget, it's not something that we accounted for, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's not in our budget, and it's not really under our initial FRP. This is going to be something that kind of falls to the outside of it. I've been hesitant to sign this until I talked to Finance Committee and until I had the Law Department review it, and I did provide a copy today to the Law Department to review. So I'll kind of leave it at that. I mean, I've been told you don't have a choice. You've been randomly selected. We're coming in and doing this audit, and you have to pay us.
But prior to this letter of engagement, we were operating under an $895 flat fee where we just scanned them stuff. And that would have maybe continued if we just kept scanning them stuff. It's only because we invited them here that they did the letter of engagement, right?
No, the letter of engagement is from the beginning. It's not an additional thing. It's just, my point of saying they had to come down and look for things is the amount of material that they were requesting be scanned and sent was cumbersome. And so when we asked for specifics, they couldn't give specifics. So we asked them to come down and look. And when their guy came down and looked, his comment was, oh my God, it's all of that? Okay. Yes, it's all of that. Okay, well, we're only taking this small section.
So that whole thing was independent of this engagement with indefinite quantity, indefinite time?
No, so the indefinite quantity and time, usually what they'll do is and this is pretty standard in their letters of engagement. So, for example, we have a letter of engagement with the Fiscal Emergency Commission. We have a letter of engagement with the current LGS. And it'll tell you that their rate is so much per hour, and that they estimate it'll be this many hours, and not to exceed a certain amount, and if it does, then there'll be an addendum to this. So the wording in the engagement letter is no different than the wording in every other engagement letter that we've had with the Auditor of State. My point is, this is an additional audit on top of the audit that we've already had, and after they've done everything and collected all the material, sending something and saying, oh, by the way, sign this, saying it's okay for us to charge you. That just left a little.
How much is it?
No, it's like $895.
It's the same $895.
It's not a significant cumbersome amount, but it is something, we're not supposed to enter into any contracts with outside companies without first having a PO. Or we're not supposed to enter in agreements with people without having the approval of council. So, this is not something I can just sign because I'd have to put a purchase order through first. But, I'm also asking the question of, should we sign this? Are we obligated to sign this? Or do we just not care and just sign it anyway and say, okay, this is the way it goes? When I was told initially, we're going to do this and we're going to charge you, and that's it, I thought that was done. And then they start putting it all together, and they're like, oh, by the way, here's the agreement that says we're allowed to charge you.
What's your gut tell? I mean, what do you think about?
What I said, I sent him an email today, and what I said is it's being reviewed by our law department, and I was going to discuss it with the finance committee, and I would just do whatever our authorities say we should do. If it is the opinion of the law department that, yes, we have to do this and you should sign it, I'll sign it. And it's not a decision that needs to be made now, it's just this, it's been a little frustrating to be suddenly forced with a contract, being told you have to sign it, but they're going to charge you anyway, but you're saying it's okay to do so.
I understand.
The whole process has been a little frustrating.
Yeah, so for me, I was looking on the Auditor State's website, trying to find anything relating to the special audit. I just didn't really see anything. I'd really like to see, what area, what department this is from. I'd like to know where in the Ohio Revised Code they're authorized to, or we're mandated to have to pay for this service.
And I did bring copies of the emails and the letter of engagement, which I can provide to you.
Oh, yeah, I would love to see that. And then the other thing is just, what's our consequence of just not spilling it out? Like, they have the information they need, so at this point, I mean, why enter into any agreement with them?
And we've complied with all of their requests of providing the information. The only rub was getting to that point of saying, do you know what you're asking for? It's a very large amount. Please be more specific. And then once they couldn't be more specific, saying, why don't you come down and look at what we have and we'll give it to you.
Couldn't we just get a bill? Like, at the end of the day, if you don't sign anything, they're probably still going to charge us.
Sure.
Something like $895.
Correct.
So there's a part of me that goes, you asked, what is the consequence? The consequence is probably that we're still going to get a bill. It's just, and we'll probably have to pay that bill, but we're not signing anything.
But are we sure that we might?
I don't know, I'm not sure, but I'm just
The
wondering.
895, I mean, that's what I'm trying to, like, the 895, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, if it's something that we have to pay, we have to pay. Probably shouldn't waste a ton of energy on that. It's more, to me, I'm more confused about the contract part of it and the fact that it sounded like you said that there could be additional expenses if they deem so.
Correct. That is their standard language. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that's just more concern for me at this point, but, I would go with the recommendation, whatever the law department says and you come up with, and I'm sure that, you're going to know a lot more than I'm going to know about why we would have to pay this.
And I think that's pretty much all I have.
Just to tie a bow on that, is the expectation that you're going to leave and email, call, chat with Keith and Mr. Moore, Mr. Gary?
Yeah, we've already started it. I'm just going to wait till I hear back from them. And
It would be good if you could just email the committee so we at least know. And then if it's something that surprises us, we'll make sure we bring it to general counsel. Is that fair, guys?
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, one more note on the third quarter financial analysis. James rightfully requested that be done quarterly rather than semi-annually. And that was good timing because Anna Mary wants us to do it quarterly. So, and to make sure that it's in the committee report that we submit, that, we did look at, she's very specific. It's the same stuff we did look at, but it's the revenue report, the expense report, and actually making sure we review the bank rec too. That's what we need to add. So, good point. We'll do that, and I'll make sure that it's in the report we send out to the following general council meeting. So, just letting you know. Okay, that's all I had for agenda item number 1. Thank you, Jim. The second agenda item, if I could invite Tom Perry up. I don't know if you, yep, there, I see you. You're going to do some tech stuff to try to help us bring in a guest speaker. As I said, the point of this segment was really just to give our committee and residents in the city a 101 class, I guess, of TIFs. And so if you could do any introductions as well for who we brought speaking on the matter, that'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Eric. So tonight we have Dan Blank and Todd Castellini, and they're with the Port Authority. And essentially, the Port Authority is the land bank authority for Hamilton County. So they have a lot of different functions, though. They're here to help us. They're they're kind of a quasi-government entity. And there's potential not only with our future TIF with PLK, but also with some of our previous TIFs to free up some money for public infrastructure. So it's kind of a confusing process. We wanted to bring in people who could kind of break it down, explain it to the Finance Committee, and also explain it to the residents back home. So, yeah, Dan, if you want to come up, that'd be great. Yeah, that works.
You want Todd?
Yeah, Todd unfortunately couldn't be with us today, so he's going to call in.
I'm going to try and have him speak a little bit.
We could try, yeah.
Yeah.
Todd, you want to see if he can speak?
Yeah, Dan?
Is it on
I
speaker?
was going to say, you might want to, make sure it's on speaker.
Todd, can you hear?
Can you hear me? Am I loud enough?
Loud enough?
I can hear.
Yeah.
Okay, should I go ahead and start, Tom?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. First of all, thank you so much for inviting us to talk this evening, and I must apologize. As an abundance of caution, I'm at home and not there due to some recent travel in Wisconsin, and so unfortunately I need to quarantine. But nonetheless, I'm glad I can participate by phone and look forward to a good conversation. Tom asked me to talk to you all tonight about TIF financing, which is tax increment financing. Now, I don't know the extent of knowledge with the audience here, so he asked me to keep it sort of basic and talk about some benefits. And Dan Blank is here with us. Dan Blank is an investment banker underwriter, and he assists the Port Authority with a lot of TIF transactions, and he's here to weigh in from time to time to help provide some color and answer some questions. So for those of you who don't know what TIF financing does, it essentially helps pay for a portion of development. It captures the improved value of development and monetizes that improved value so that you could use the proceeds up front to pay for typically just public improvements. A lot of mixed-use developments involve both private improvements as well as public improvements. And what I mean by that is a typical situation, you'll see apartments and some commercial space where you'll have retail and possibly office. And all those private improvements will need utilities and various infrastructures, including maybe roadways, parking lots, maybe a parking garage. And so one way to pay for those public improvements is to issue TIF bonds. And the way that you issue the TIF bonds is by using the expected improved value of the existing real estate. And all that increment would be then used to pay for future debt service on the TIF bonds. We do this a lot all over the county and a lot downtown. And the port is often used because we do so much of this. And not only do we issue the bonds, we maintain the post-issuance compliance matters that goes on for the life of the bonds. So we work real well with municipalities and developers all over the county to help finance a lot of different projects. One of the most recent ones that's probably most known is the Martin Luther King intersection on 71, where there's going to be a lot of new development. We recently issued some TIF bonds to pay for a very large parking deck, which will be accompanied by 2 large office buildings, as well as future development as well. So I want to stop there, Tom, and just kind of check to see where we are and see if there's any questions. And I may have gone over this rather quickly, and I don't want to glaze over anything.
Yep.
So do you have any questions, Tom,
Any
or
other
should I elaborate on something?
Yep. So we understood, I'm just going to, in case people didn't hear as clear, I may be repeating something. We understand that if a development happens, there's one that we've been talking about that's pretty prominent in our city with PLK. And if a TIF happens, essentially that space is then improved by, I'm going to make this number up, $1 million. The value of that whole property is improved by $1 million. Is it fair to say that that $1 million then serves as collateral for a bond to be issued and then payments to be made out of that bond?
Yeah. Todd, is it okay to answer that? Right, take a swing at that?
Yeah, that'd be great, because I didn't hear the whole question.
I was loving it.
Okay.
Yeah, so effectively what happens is that $1 million that is generated from the improvements, it will generate real estate taxes. And the real estate taxes will pay for the bonds. And there is typically a priority tax lien on the property, just like any tax. So if debt service is not paid by the increment, the value increase, then there's a foreclosure right. So effectively, yes, it does support the bond issue. There's not a mortgage, but there's a tax lien.
Thank you.
And so when we look at, Todd, I'm going to go ahead and just expand a little bit on that, if that's okay.
That's great, thank you.
So when we look at projects, so I'm going to back up just a little bit, if that's okay. So my background is investment banking and do a lot of municipal bond financings, and actually have a fairly long history with the city of Norwood. So you guys, as you probably already know, have 5 existing TIFs outstanding. You've got the 2006 Cornerstone, the 2010 Urban and Renewal, the 2013 University Station, 2015 Rookwood, and 2017, I believe it's Central Park. So my firm and I underwrote the 2006, the 2010, and the 2013 bonds for Norwood. So know it well. So we look at the existing issues and say, is there an opportunity to refund those, like a house refund? You go from high mortgage to a low mortgage. All of those have fairly high interest rates on them. And for various reasons right now, probably only the 2010 bonds are the ones that have an economic benefit to refund. So we are looking at that right now with the developer. There may be other reasons that they aren't refunded, because you do need school participation. And if the school district decides not to participate at the same levels as they did back in 2010, it may not make sense. So when we look at new issues, I know you mentioned like the PLK. When you look at a TIF, you can do either a project TIF, so it's very specific to a specific piece of ground and a specific development, or you can do a district TIF, where we'll encumber a larger area of land. And I don't want to jump ahead of Pat, I know he's going to talk to him about that. We see and do both, and both are very common. With respect to the project TIF, again, it depends on how long the build-out takes, over what period of time, and what that increment's going to be, the improved value, to see how much in real estate taxes it generates. Then, again, we'll take those cash flows, apply them to an interest rate, and say you can borrow X amount of dollars for public improvements, road, sewer, streetscape, garages, those kinds of things. And I probably went very fast on that as well.
That's great.
Any questions on that?
Looking around to,
Yeah, so my question is, it sounds like you said of the existing TIF bonds that we have, that you're only seeing, you said potentially one of them that would be worth refinancing, is it?
Well, they all will be worth refinancing at some point in time. The 2015s and the 2017s aren't callable until 2025 and 2027, so we really can't do anything with those. The 2006, which is the cornerstone, we tried to do a refunding for that over the last couple of years, but because of the school district negotiations and some other reasons, it didn't make sense for the developer at that point in time. So economically, I think it makes sense, but practically, it wasn't making sense. So the 2010 is probably the one that makes the most sense. The 2013 University Station will be refundable in 2023. So as we get closer to that date, it would make sense to look at as well. And again, you've got to bring the school district in to negotiate terms, and then you have to get the developer to agree to it, and then obviously the city to agree to it.
Thank you.
And I know with some, depending on the difference between project TIFs and TIF districts, there's some restrictions on where you can spend that public infrastructure money sometimes, right?
There are a couple different types of TIFs that are out there. The most common is what's called a 40B TIF, which is typically for public improvements. And it's going to be something that is actually dedicated, like a street's dedicated, or a public parking garage that actually acts as a true public parking garage. Whether it's a district or a project, you're still going to fall under the more general umbrella of the use of funds.
Okay.
So again, most of them are done for public improvement purposes, although we have seen them for other purposes, and it's a different TIF statute.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I know that in discussions I've had in the past with the school board, the school treasurer and a member of the school board, the school board is pretty opposed to, at this point, from our understanding, the school district's pretty opposed to having any, they're not a big fan of district-based TIFs, right, where you would put a TIF over a wider area, right, because they still want to capture the increase in, value in the places in Norwood, right, so that they can have additional revenues. And so there's not a strong desire to move towards that. But I don't know, have you seen that in other places where the school districts, since they're the ones that primarily get the property taxes, where they push back, and are there ways that have been worked around that?
That's a great question. Every school district is unique, and every school district is obviously under a little bit of financial pressure that's been building, not just today, but over the years. Most school districts will negotiate, and you'll see that they'll take some percentage of what they would have received had there not been a TIF. Sometimes it's a higher percentage, sometimes it's a lower percentage. It might have a step up to it. A step up meaning if there's excess cash flow that comes in because the project TIF outperformed, or the coverages that were required in the market created more cash flow, it becomes a negotiation whether that money goes to the city or goes to the school district, or it splits. So those are the kinds of things you would negotiate with the school district. I know that the deals that we had financed, I think all the school compensation agreements were different looking back at it. They started back at 25%. Some of them were at 55%, so they've changed over the years. So, but it's clearly a negotiation.
And that's, oh, sorry to interrupt you, but that's one of the differences between Norwood and Cincinnati, right? I think Cincinnati, because they have so many TIFs, they have kind of a blanket agreement with the schools there where there's some kind of pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. Is that?
They do. So the Cincinnati Public Schools had a standing agreement that's, I think it was 10 or 12 years old, but it effectively was 25% for project TIFs and 27% for TIF districts. And that just changed this calendar year, and it went up to 33%. So it's gone a little bit higher. But yes, but it is a standing agreement, so you don't have to negotiate. Oftentimes with school districts that don't cover as broad of a geographic area, it's just a one-on-one negotiation with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this is for James or anyone, but could we talk a little bit more about that? Because me or anyone that might think, well, if a district is, I'm making this up, 5 streets in any direction from the project. But the project improves the value by that $1 million or even more. You might say, well, man, that's okay, that's more than enough. What's this concept of coverage? Well, I'm trying to make sure that we all understand why the school board would see that as a negative thing.
From my understanding is that, they don't want to see the increased value captured and kind of sucked away into this TIF district, that they want to see it, that increased value when things get reassessed, that, I think it's that the taxes will essentially go up. And I think it seems logical. I just don't know exactly how the assessments, and when you read, I'm not super familiar with how that process works. But that's, from my understanding, is where it comes from. And in general, you've got TIF districts in Cincinnati, and to me, they're almost like, there's TIF districts all over the city of Cincinnati. They've got probably 50 of them. Probably not that many, but there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And to me, they almost act as like slush funds, right? And I say that in not a super terrible way. I'm just saying they almost act as individual community council slush funds where they can help to do some kind of project here, project there, or whatever. But then that's money that's not going into their general fund. And the general fund is really the most transparent place for money, right? Because it's easy to see exactly where it goes, like in the financial
It's a great
reporting.
explanation.
So that's what, I know that there's a lot of potential in the districts. I just want to put that word of caution out there. And then as well, if we do a TIF district, one last thing, then if there's another project that's going to be like next door and it's already included in the original TIF district, and if we were banking on the increased revenue from, the nearby parcel to help pay for the public improvements at the original, then it might limit us, if I'm wrong, just correct me, but it could limit us in what we're able to offer that new parcel, right? Because we were already banking on their tax revenue going into the original catalyst, if you will, that started whatever renaissance that we're trying to capture the taxes from.
And one more follow-on. For TIF districts, is there a magic, radius that you play with? Because in that was a great example, that crossing too far over into a potential new source. Is there a magic number, radius outside of the project that you typically
It can be
see?
bad if you draw it too far. That's what happened
that's what I'm
with
kinda
the
hearing.
Young Center in Louisville. I believe they drew it probably 5 or 6 blocks out, and really only maybe a block or two, you saw the values increase, but it really didn't spread through the rest of the community. So you have to be careful when you're drawing districts, from my understanding.
Yeah, it's, the districts, and Cincinnati's really a good example. They've created, I've lost count, but probably 30-plus districts, and, they're all specifically geographical. You can't take from this district to pay improvements on that district, so they are a little bit centralized as far as how you use the funds and where you can use them. And then when you create the districts, it's really a function of what do we think is going to come and how much support does that new project need. So if we go back to, I'll just use your $1 million example. So you got a guy comes in and says, yeah, this is great. I'm going to create $1 million of new value here, and all I need is a road. So that $1 million supports his road. But you've got a big district. So the next guy comes up and he says, well, I need a parking garage. So now the question is, can his project support that parking garage, or can some of the extra money that the first guy's throwing off help support that? So you've kind of got a domino effect of and that's why we see a lot of project TIFs where, they are specific, because the first guy in may have the best benefit because he's not having to pay for anybody else. Not to discount districts at all. If you've got a large tract of land and you're going to develop it over a longer period of time, that's certainly something you should consider.
Thank you. And thank you both. That was useful. Yeah, it's just free.
I can answer some of those questions too. I just, on the question of a TIF district versus a project TIF, because I'm not familiar at all with the separate structure for a district TIF. The way Norwood has done its TIFs is Norwood is not on the hook for anything, period. The way those deals are structured, we don't pay for our legal fees, we don't pay for the recording fees, we don't pay for the bond. it's all paid for out of the TIF funds, and that's all guaranteed by the developer. And the question is, if you do a district TIF, is there a way to insulate the city in any real way without, unless you just wait until the project's done and assessed by the county at the higher level and then issue debt?
From a marketing perspective, and then Pat can certainly address the legal perspective of it, the short answer is whether we have done district TIFs or we've done project TIFs, the only way that the city would be on the hook is if you decide to issue the debt directly. So I'm going to issue city debt, and I'm going to use those revenues from this district to pay for it. Then you're on the hook. If you decide, I don't want to be on the hook, we're not issuing debt, you can issue through the Port Authority as a conduit, and the developer is the sole person, and that their real estate becomes what's going to really support that TIF, both from a cash flow and from a security perspective if there's a foreclosure. But yeah, we would want to insulate the city from being on the hook or being obligated to pay anything.
In the TIF, even if the city issues it, the city is not on the hook for a TIF. There's an obligation of the owner of the property, even if the TIF revenue generated from the property are insufficient to pay the debt. They are required to pay an amount above and beyond that in order to satisfy the debt service requirements. And that increased amount, even though it's more than what they would have otherwise paid in taxes, that still constitutes taxes for purposes of the lien on the property. So at the end of the day, if they were unable to satisfy that obligation, this is what we've done for the most recent one, which is over across here, but over the Viking project.
CDK.
CDK.
Okay, so over there's a TIF rent, but every one of those parcels is obligated, if there were ever a shortfall in the TIF revenue generated. Every one of those parcels is obligated by a formula to make sure that they cover some portion of that shortfall. And if they were to not cover that, you could foreclose on that property, sell the building, and then use the proceeds of that sale to satisfy the obligation on the bond. And the other question too about the district versus the project TIF, there are a lot of different details that are important in many circumstances. The county, for example, has a lot more rights to the TIF district with respect to some of those revenues that they're able to or that are not kind of exempted from the TIF exemption. And to your point about the location of the improvements that are built with the proceeds, it's not a geographic distance or anything like that. There is a term that's a little bit loose as far as how it's actually implemented, but a TIF district, the public improvements that you construct with the proceeds or the pilots from a TIF district, the technical legal term is that they benefit and serve the exempted property. So if you have roads, for example, that are in that area, and it basically contributes to ease of movement of traffic, it's a little bit easier to have the argument that it benefits and serves those parcels in a TIF district. Whereas in a project TIF, the terminology of the statute is directly benefit. Now, frankly, that's never really been challenged. It's never been litigated of what the difference is between directly benefited versus benefited served. But that's technically how you're supposed to evaluate it. Whereas, so you have this district, it's a little more broad, but it's not a geographic question. It's a question of what's serving. And so, if you get away from roads for a little bit, you talk about, if you have a water plant or a water facility, wastewater, some kind of utility, the utility can be, the proximity is irrelevant. If that utility serves the properties that are within the TIF, you can use the TIF revenues from that area to pay for some, or all of that project. So it's, again, it's not just a geographic thing. A lot of times, a developer, when they're coming to develop something, they would like to use the TIF revenues, frankly, in a way that more directly benefits their property, and that's sort of the way it's supposed to work. It doesn't have to necessarily, but it's generally in connection with the project, because there is going to be an increase in use of public improvements or a need for public improvements to support the project. So you have parking or, private roads or curb cuts or whatever it is, sidewalks, for that project. So that's sort of the evaluation that you do.
Thanks.
I won't talk too much longer, I promise. But another thing to consider is if you're looking at TIF districts or even a project TIF, is that there is a trigger, depending on how you structure it, for when it starts. So if you have some large, just a large field, you say, well, why don't we put a tip on it? Let's do a whole tip district. But that's not necessarily always the best way to do it, because if you don't know when certain parts of the course that are going to be developed, you may lose a lot of time while that tip is in place. And if you're not going to build something for 10 years, you want to structure it so that your clock starts ticking for 10 years, not right now. So all those things come into play when you're setting these things up, and there's a way to do it to benefit, maximize the revenues and project you are to make sure that it works for their plan and their city's timeline. And the last thing is, as far as the revenues in the general fund, most of the time it's associated with debt. You're going to use that to base your debt. There's probably some coverage expectations, there'll be some excess funds at some point. Those excess funds, when the tip does wear off, those are able to be used and deposited into your general fund and used for whatever the city would like to use it for. Obviously, the term of these things is like 30 years. I'm not going to be around when these start off, but that is the end result ultimately, is that money does go to the city.
I had a question about that.
You don't need to.
Just to follow up on that. What about, okay, so you got the school taxes, you got the city taxes, and then I guess you have the county taxes, right? So what happens to those when there's excess value, I guess, captured? Do they still get paid, or do they kind of go away?
They do not. The TIF basically diverts those funds. And so what it does, it takes every overlapping tax district. So say the schools, the county, the city, if there's a library district, park district, a vocational school, whatever, all that stuff. Basically, the process is you exempt all that money is diverted. But because the schools are so dependent on their real property tax support thing, they basically can come to the table and you can make a deal. And that is if the tip is longer than 10 years and over 75%, over 75% of an exemption. So technically, you don't have to have any school involvement if you did a 75% 10-year exemption. Let's just say it's a 30-year deal and you want the whole amount. You go to the schools. The school is the only one in a project tip that gets a seat at the table to have that negotiation. If you do a tip district, which there are a lot of reasons to do it, frankly, a tip district, I can go through it. But a tip district, the county basically does have a place at the table because they do have a right to some of the revenues that are exempted from the county tip district. So there are various levies, there are specific levies, there's a list of them, that you can't just go in and sweep away and collect as tip. So that's something you can think about when you do a tip district. But tip districts, like for example, you can't just do a project tip on residential, single-family residential housing. You can do a tip district on it. But the tip district then comes with the downside of having the county having, again, say in it, and you need to negotiate some with them with respect to some of their levies. So, depending on your project and everything that you're, the whole deal, you look at these two and evaluate it. But typically, it's going to be a project. Not always, obviously, but the city of Cincinnati is a little bit different because they're large and it's pretty consistent development down there.
Right.
You know it's going to exist and they're captured. It's a strategy they have. I don't know if it'll work here. Because again, you may put it on, and there's rules about once you have a tip district overlay, what you can do in the future. So you don't want to just throw them out there, like you said, because you don't know what you can use for in the future or what's going to capture there. Because it is a little more, not random development in the city, but it's a little less.
Right, we don't have a TIF deal every year like Cincinnati does, so.
Well, you don't have a development every year.
Right.
If you go downtown, you pick a 10-block area, I mean, you're going to, because you need the increment, right? You're not just getting the tax.
Right.
You're only getting these tax values. The tax values increase in housing. So that's what you need is the development there. It's not just exempting an area and taking the tax money. You need incremental value. That's the name of the tax increment.
And I did have one more question, not super related, but it is. Can our law department and like our financial service, like our auditors department, can they, for the work that they have to do for these TIFs, can they bill their time and their hours to them? Like if they have to help assist with an audit or something else? And is that something that you see in other places, or is that not really something that happens?
It's not, there are fees. I mean, people could include some annual small percentage fee. I mean, like, the people that get paid annually out of the say somebody who's doing whatever ongoing, call it administration, you can get a fee. In the city of Cincinnati, style with sometimes there's other townships that will include a small fee for administration. Is that your question?
Yeah, yes, yep.
And that's where the port might be able to help, right? From my understanding, they can help with the administration of TIFs.
Yeah, so oftentimes the annual fees that you will see that are most prevalent are going to be port fees for administration. Typically, there will be a third-party TIF administrator who will come in and do an annual report on the project TIF, if it's a project TIF, and say this is its value, this is what it's collecting, this is where the monies need to go. So that's an annual fee, and then there's a trustee fee, which is a smaller fee. So those are the typical annual fees you see. And I think the other consideration, it goes really back to your question. So I'll say in the old days, cities oftentimes looked at doing general obligation debt for TIFs, or could do like a non-tax revenue, which most cities don't do that anymore at all. So when you look to the Port Authority, if they would be your conduit issuer, you can either have them issue it directly into the marketplace on a non-rated basis, or depending on the size of the transaction, it could go through their bond fund, which has a rating. And we would analyze both ways and see which is more economical and what gets more project funds to the project itself, and try and help through that analysis. Any other questions?
What's our takeaway, I guess? Or where do we go from here now, kind of after this conversation?
Well, the point was an education, which I think I got, so hopefully.
Oh, yeah,
other
I'd
people
like
did. So that was the intent. I guess a takeaway could be in our committee report asking if we wanted to further discuss the type of TIFs that would be brought by PLK. I think the reason that it's even on my mind, is because of PLK. So that we could just try to have another follow-up specifically with PLK.
I would point out one other thing that you all should consider that does have a title change. You want to say something? Go ahead.
And it may be the same thing, is I sent something to the chair, because I've had two firms and the port talk to me about refinancing the Linden Point TIF.
Yeah.
As the time is there, and so I wanted to counsel in the administration, is this something we want to pursue? Which path forward do we want to take on that? And that's kind of what should we be saying, yeah, go ahead and start crunching some numbers to let us know where we stand. And while I know the school district's not excited about anything new, if we're, at the very worst, if we're talking about we're going to do a lower interest rate.
Sure. Yeah.
And free up revenue, and if all that extra revenue goes to the schools, we're better off than we are now, as far as I'm concerned. The schools have more money, and as opposed to whoever's holding those bonds, I'm not sure if they were in the market or if there's a private holder for those.
So they were sold in the market, so we've
Yeah.
run the analysis, and it does save probably close to $500,000 in net present value dollars. We've been talking to Nair, who's one of our clients, and we have to make sure that there's no impediment to them, are they selling the property, those kinds of things. And if they like the economics of it, then I know they'll come to you guys and say, this is what we want to do. I believe in that one, that the school payment was 25% of gross revenues annually. I don't know if it had a kicker, like if there's an extra, I can check on that. But we have that analysis, we can share it with you if you want to see it.
Yeah, and I don't know if the committee's got a preference, but I spoke to, and honestly, I didn't bring the emails, I don't remember the names of the firm. We spoke to the firm that Patrick recommended. I spoke to somebody from the firm that Jim McGraw, who generally represents developers, that he recommended, and I spoke to Todd from the port. So I don't know if we have a particular financial path we want to follow as far as who we want to kind of handle the at least the initial numbers to see whether the deal makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway, if someone's going to present a value proposition, that's great. And maybe the next finance committee meeting is the right forum for that. Kind of looking around to see head nods from you three.
Yeah, fine with me.
I mean,
Is that okay, Keith?
the question for the, do we need an agreement with the port before we get too much farther in to move that forward?
And I won't speak for the port, I'll have Todd reach out to you guys. From our perspective, we have the analysis, like I said, we're talking to the developer now, so, once we get them over the first hurdle of, yes, this seems like a good idea, why wouldn't I do it kind of thing, I know they'll probably reach out to you guys, and then obviously it's up to you guys who you want to use.
And that's Nair, who's probably going to
Yes.
do it?
Correct.
And Pat, there's one that's kind of time sensitive from my understanding, one of the,
There was a change in the law this year, basically depending on, this doesn't apply to all tips, but one tip that it would apply to is the Wood tip. And basically what the rule says is that, I believe it's what, assume for just discussion purposes, it's $1.5 million. If you have $1.5 million in revenues last year, you're able this year, if you pass an ordinance, to extend your tip for an extra 30 years beyond what it was. And typically, before this rule, and we can go into why this rule exists, but it's beneficial basically to do that, because at the end of the 30 years right now, there will be no bonds. You will have that tip revenue to use for whatever is within the purposes that you authorized initially. And back to the prior discussion, it would have to be something that benefits the exempted property. So in this case, exchange or common, I guess. Maybe it's on exchange.
it's exchange, yeah.
But so it's kind of they put this law, and I don't know how long it's going to be around. It was clearly, by the way, it was written for somebody got to put it in there so that they could extend their tip. Maybe somebody thought maybe Easter or something. But point being, that has to be done this year. That's obviously a policy decision for you all as far as whether you want to do that. You do have to make the school whole under the rule anyway, so it shouldn't really affect the schools. But one of the uses, in addition to just public improvements, they also added, within the last couple of years, they use it to maintain roads as well. So it's, unless there's some other overriding policy perspective or objection to it, there's really not a lot of downside from the city's perspective, because extending that 30 years, we don't have a good, again, the problem is if you were to put a new tip on it, the value ultimately would be up here. But you're going to get a tip and start an evaluation down here with this much increment that you can get revenue for another 30 years that you can use up there, which is a high traffic area. Obviously, you're going to need it at some point, or it's nice to have. I would recommend at least considering that. I talked to Keith about, actually passing ordinance and going back through and getting all the details. But I would just suggest giving some direction to Keith and talk to me about making that happen.
I think we could easily spend $1.5 million in 10 years on just the streets that bound, that bound the development. So that's a direct benefit, yeah.
And so this will be after the bond, which, in 2025, if those are paid off or what it'll be, but point being, you'll have that money, there's really no, I can't think of any downside, frankly, to doing that. So I would just suggest not, it seems like the end of the year is not that close, but it's going to be here, especially depending on your schedule and all that stuff. So I would not, not
Yeah.
to say what to do, but at least think about that, and if you have any thoughts, think of the key, or call me, obviously, whenever, I'm happy to discuss.
So you're basically saying if we do that, excuse me, if we do that, then we won't be having a bond that we're paying. So basically, it'll be like a very large amount of that TIF fund every year, because we're not paying the bond payment anymore. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, okay, yeah. So, and then we'd have to just decide, do we want it locked up in that, or do we want to kind of revert to something else, back to a more normal strategy? And can we do that for any of our TIF districts that we have today?
No, it had, I
Or-
believe it had to exceed $1.5 million in, I think the road was the only one.
Oh, wow, okay.
So again, like somebody had a project in mind.
Right,
It's how to work with it at the end of the year, how it kind of what the rules are, it turns into like a rule that has to be the immediately preceding year. It's one of those rules they put in where they meet it for a certain project, but you're not allowed to pass laws for certain projects, so they just put parameters around it that are pretty tight. Something, but it applies here, so you might as well take advantage of it. I mean, you could borrow more money, you did have a big project you want to do, some investment bankers will tell you, yeah. But, you'd have the option, basically. You'll have a stream of revenue to either use annually or department gets to do whatever you want, but like I said, it's not gonna, an opportunity to kind of pop out of nowhere, because that was one of the things about TIF, is that if it's 30 years and you're kind of done, you have to start over, in some cases you can't even do that, so it's, and I can get more information on that, do a little memo about what it is, but it's pretty straightforward.
And that issue, you guys may already know this, so that issue is callable in 2025. It's tax exempt, right now you can't do advanced refundings, means you can't refund it a year or two in advance, even if it made sense, other than taxable. So it probably isn't going to be refundable until 23 at the earliest, assuming rates would hold. And then there is it's about a 7.5% interest rate, so, you know, should be a lot of theoretical savings there. But there is a 3% premium on it, so that's about a little over $500,000 of prepayment. So you just kind of put all that together and see what you have.
Yeah, the schools have some.
Yes.
They are, under that agreement, the schools, like Dan was talking about, they are accumulating the deficiency in the amount that they owe, just because it fits them. You know, they've gone into the board of revisions, got the valuation drop, and so that hurts your revenues. The schools haven't been getting all the money, but then that's to be paid back. But again, you know, there's no downside really to doing this. But some of that money gets to school in the long term, there will be a lot of, it's a good, who knows what will happen in the world being tomorrow these days, but in the long term, assuming things go back to normal, that would be a nice resource for the city to have. And, you know, it's pretty well, it's a good tip. Once, like you said, you get the rates drop, once it's, 7.5 is high, especially for something that's cash flowing. And then once the bonds are gone, like I said, you have all the money.
Yeah, and I think the maturity is 2041 on it, so it's not that far out that you could kind of get this new cash flow stream going when the bonds retire.
So,
That's something to think about.
I just had a quick question, just the overall concept, because, normally we've had, I think, Frost Brown Todd, right, Patrick, I think you've been kind of like lead on when we issue these bonds, right? And potentially there's this new factor here, having the Port Authority assisting. What's the fee structure to the TIF, project TIF or the TIF districts, having the Port Authority involved as well versus, I think in the past, we just had Frost Brown Todd involved, so.
Yeah, I can say one thing about it. Here, and I'll talk about, what Dan had mentioned was the bond fund. Basically, just think of that as extra money that helps investors get more comfortable, which is the interest rates down. So the port has fees every year, as do the trustee or whatever. So what, so Dan or the port, if you have your information provider or whoever, what they'll do is say, hey, there's some fees associated, but, is that more than offset by the reduction in interest rates that you're paying because you do have this additional support from the structure? And that's how you sort of look at it from a financial perspective.
Yeah, so when you look at fees, I mean, there's going to be some commonality, no matter how you do your financing. You're going to have legal counsel. You're going to have an underwriter to sell the debt, whether it's bond fund or non-bond fund. And again, the economics of the bond fund should always win out because of the rating of it. And then you'll have port fees. So all those are aggregated together as upfront costs and all can be borrowed. The majority of them are always able to be borrowed. Then there'll be those 3 annual fees that we discussed earlier, the TIF administrator, the port administration, and the trustee. So all that goes into the analysis, and then you see what the project can support, whether you're refunding it or doing a new project TIF or whatever. And we just run the analysis. So normally you kind of work backwards. The developer will come in, and you guys have all dealt with developers. They'll want as much as they can get, and that's the first answer. And then the question is, what are you building? What's the value of it? What's the county auditor think the value of it is? Because what you build it for and what the auditor says it's worth are 2 different things often. So you've got to go with the lesser, more conservative value. And then we'll just apply those cash flows to an interest rate inside of a bond issue over a 30-year period and say, this is what you can get.
So I guess the overall, the gist of the question, having the port, if you all weren't doing the underwriting, somebody else would be, basically. So
Yeah, there's
we would be
some-
paying similar fees, whether the port was involved or Patrick found somebody else to do the underwriting.
Yeah, so if the city, so the issues that I've done historically, the city did issue the debt directly. And again, you had the legal, and then you had the underwriter, and we sold the bonds. So what the port offers is the value of their rating, if you go bond fund, and the ability for them to do the administration work and kind of get it off your back, if you will. And that's the annual fee that they'll take. There's not a huge difference in those fees at the end of the day. The bond fund has certain fees that non-rated, they have a rating that they pay for. There's no rating on, obviously, non-rated. You've got a better interest rate, different reserve funds. So at the end of the day, you just look at both of them. And while the fees should be fairly close on one, the bond fund, because of the rating, should have a better interest rate, or it will have a better interest rate. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So Keith, I think I'll speak to you after this. I'll try to incorporate as much as I can in the report, and then we will plan for the next Finance Committee meeting to have the follow-up. And Patrick, if that involves a member from you, I'll make sure it's included. But we'll prepare ourselves, or we'll have an expectation for this committee to relook at both of those issues. Sound good? Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm okay. Good.
Thank
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you
being
both
here.
for coming in, and Tom,
Yeah.
thanks for setting it up,
Thank
okay?
you. Todd?
Thank you.
Take care, Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you for attending here. Obviously, it was a lot easier for you to answer these questions. A lot of it was difficult to hear. But if there's any follow-up questions, you could reach me through Tom, and happy to elaborate. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Todd.
Take that.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys, I appreciate it.
Bye, folks. Cool. Next on the agenda was the claims process. Mr. Tim Gary presented us kind of the latest and greatest claims, so we could see the exposure that the city is facing. He commented there wasn't a whole lot of activity he's seen in the summer months on existing or new claims. That was just kind of a passing comment he made. But really the point was not just these particular claims, or they might be, we'll talk about it, but it's what's the process. We know that this exposure exists. We know that Tim, or Mr. Gary and Mr. Moore deal with these as best they can on an individual basis, and that includes the kind of playing the investigator and seeing if they warrant more attention, or if they feel it's their opinion that it's not going to amount to anything. They make those calls on the city's behalf, and we need to decide, I guess, as a committee, if we are okay with them just continuing to look at it individually, if we should be reviewing these case by case here. That seemed, where we left this, that seemed a little bit cumbersome. Or if a hybrid of those plans should be drafted for us, where we have like a threshold, or we have a, I don't know, quarterly review or something like that. So that's what I wanted to kind of pick that torch back up and make sure we're a little bit more intentional about a process and can try to create one. So for the three of you guys, did you have any comments before I invite Tim up to kind of talk about that process?
I'll just say I've been pretty outspoken on this. I feel like that this, in my opinion, I do not like that, Finance Committee, essentially, the Finance Budget and Audit Committee, essentially has to be the quasi-investigator. The law department's been very helpful, so this is not any dig to the law department, it's just a dig more to the process. But I would really like to get recommendations from the city administration on whether we should process these or not. I mean, they're the ones that are there on a day-to-day basis. They know kind of what's going on. It's their employees usually that are either involved, or their departments, Public Works. Let's just say if there's like a pothole claim that we have.
Yeah.
To me, it just makes so much more sense for us to get a recommendation from the city. And also the city administration, working with the law department, will know like, what's our like potential, what's the, not chance of getting a lawsuit, but like even chance and or potential exposure, right? What are the odds of it? Is it better just not to pay some of these things, right? Or is it better to pay them? So, there's a lot that goes into it. And so, to me, I mean, we could have a meeting every month hour and a half meeting every month.
Sure.
To talk about claims,
I know.
right? And I know that you understand that, but I definitely think that we need to get that process rectified. And as you all know, in the past, we've talked about this already, but there was an ordinance on the books allowing for, it was passed years, decades ago, allowing for the auditor and the law director to, work together and decide whether or not they might pay a specific claim up to a certain dollar amount, a dollar amount that's really small in today's standards, I think $200 or $250 or whatever it was. So, it's just my recommendation that we, as much as possible, try to move this off of the legislative side and more to the executive offices to at least make some of these, either empower them to make the decisions or at least to be making recommendations so that we can kind of take a quick review. But having people come up like we've done in the
I know.
past, and I've done it too. I did it too, last year as well. But having people come and state their case to the finance committee about why they deserve this or they deserve that or what have you. I know that's how it has been done in the past, and especially during heavy fiscal times when the city just literally just had no money. But I think that we can do better for the future and be more of a sign off, right? Versus actually having to decide these things.
So, Tim, or Mr. Gary, I did invite you because I wanted for this to be a conversation, and I wanted your feedback from the law department. Something that was tossed around in March, so February or March, I couldn't remember exactly what, was the concept of a threshold, that if the exposure, and I like your point about putting a probability factor, like it was, maybe the threshold should be a dollar figure and a probability, okay? Like if they were in 25%, 50%, 75%, 100, or something like that. If we had both those thresholds, and it was the opinion of the law department that those thresholds were passed, that case could maybe come for our sign off. But anything below that, whether dollar figure or probability, we would maybe let the city administration and the law department work together to kind of handle or act. That's an option. What do you guys think of that? And that includes you, Mr. Gary.
I mean, I personally felt like when we talked about this last time that we kind of decided that we would kind of come to a threshold agreement on a dollar amount threshold, which for some reason, I might be wrong, was around $1,000 to $1,500 in my head.
$1,000 was what we wrote.
Yeah, I mean, and Mr. Gary, Mr. Moore, they both described how they've handled these in the past, and they look into them. They don't just try to say, here's your money, go ahead. They do fight these unless they're given sufficient probable evidence. I just don't see why we're overthinking it. I don't see why we don't just say, hey, this is what we'll try. I think that was a recommendation by Mr. Gary and Keith Moore to have that amount.
Yeah. Some of this meeting is also not just to define it very concretely, but also the takeaway will be probably an email by me to the mayor and the administration, I suppose, for him to flow down however he thinks it should flow down, to say, this is how it should be, right? And if there's a problem, I guess it would come back to us. But that was kind of the intent of this, is to say, what's the threshold? What's the language that we want to learn, what we want to have me say, and then me tell the mayor.
If it's over $1,000, it comes to us. If it's under $1,000, they deal with it.
So that could be quite a lot of stuff, though. There's a lot of claims on this list if you look at it.
Yeah, well, the ones that are over $1,000 we'll handle, and the ones that aren't.
What's handle mean?
With the recommendation, though, like I definitely want to, I want them to get their first pass at it, and maybe we or council has a vote, right, to say, yes, we sign off on this group that you presented to us. But yeah, I don't think that, other than getting a report, maybe quarterly, annually, whatever, to just say who was paid, exactly what we have right here.
Yeah.
I don't think we need much more than that. I think this is all we really need for the claims that are, $123. I think that, I just trust that the administration, they can take care of that. And if they decide not to pay something, right, because there's definitely things on here that I would say, like, we shouldn't pay, and I think the city administration, the law department, the auditor would probably agree, then, at that point, potentially, maybe they could come to us, but I would say at that point, we let them file the lawsuit, right? I mean, if they really want to escalate it and take it farther, because, again, it's just, we could spend so much time on this, like I said, reviewing these left and right, and to me,
Sure.
it's just not a good use of our time.
I just want to say what I'm thinking. I don't know if it's, why do we pay it? I mean, how does other municipalities handle this? Same way as why do we pay it all? Why don't we, is there,
There's,
I mean,
there's two reasons
so-
that we've discussed. So one is fairness, that if it really, the city really is at fault, right, we should make somebody whole, right, if there's something that,
well, I get
that's
that.
there.
Well,
I
it's
get
because
that,
it's
but
a
if-
public roadway,
but let's talk about
right-of-way, stuff like
habits.
that, we have to maintain them, so if we're not maintaining them, or if there is an issue that we didn't fix or something like that, then we are liable. I mean, I see why we do pay them and why we do process them. I just
So
rather put
if
a
you
bill
have a
on it,
car-
put it to bed, give it $1,000, say, hey, you guys handle it. Give us a report of the ones you passed, denied, whatever. If it's over $1,000, we're the sayer on it. They go to a lawsuit stage.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's the second
You know,
thing.
what can we do anyway but go to court against it? I mean, this is real simple to me. I think we talked about this a couple times.
Just something I was thinking, you know, I mean, I don't, you know, I,
Yes, something else.
Well-
It's a monthly report.
In general terms, the city and its residents and taxpayers benefit in some important ways from Ohio law that basically limits that grants immunity for quite a lot of things to the city. Specifically, and I know I've pointed this out to you all, Revised Code 274405 limits damages to the money that is owed, or the money that would be paid after the exhaustion of collateral resources like insurance, health insurance, collision insurance, that kind of thing. And that's a decision that the state legislature has made to essentially protect cities and their treasuries. That helps the city. I have this list of claims. The only claims that have been paid out of that list of 10 or so, as far as I remember, is a claim for one day's auto impoundment when a person got told that a car had been towed to one towing company and it in fact had been towed to another, and by the time the guy got there it was closed. That was $25. The other one is from a man who was struck by a Norwood police car and was injured and required and continues to require some medical care and physical therapy. And the council heard a special ordinance for him and passed it, which I thought was totally appropriate, because there was no serious question that we had responsibility for that after his insurance applied, his health insurance applied, and so on and so forth. I am, not just I, but our department is really busy, and we're busy doing important stuff. And these kinds of claims are frankly somewhat of a nuisance to us. Because you're like, oh, I'm taking a call at 9 o'clock in the morning because some woman hit a pothole at 7 o'clock the night before, and then trying to find out whether Public Works had gotten notice of that pothole, et cetera. It's just, I'm not sure that we ought to be the people to do, the fact checking and the investigation, and yet, because I understand the law, I also understand that there may be some benefit to doing that.
So is it your opinion, and I'm trying to get to Chris's point of what's the action? Is it your opinion that some of that responsibility should be transferred to the Finance Committee? I'm just trying to be specific about the ask.
Not necessarily. I mean, if somebody was really interested in saying, hey, I'd really like to carry that water, I'd say, that's great. We could use the help. There's no magic to me being an investigator, frankly. But I'm not necessarily suggesting that the legislative authority of the city be the fact investigator of these claims. It may make sense to have somebody in the administration do that, which would be fine with me, you know, and let us make legal calls rather than, you know, discern facts, frankly. Like I said, there's been, I haven't had contact from a claimant except for Clifford Adams, who actually coincidentally contacted me this morning, for probably now 6 or 7 months. Now, part of that is that there aren't potholes that are opening up as much in the summertime. But the point is that I just haven't had those kind of contacts, and I'm not sure that I necessarily want to, you know, rattle a bunch of, the cages of a bunch of claims, frankly.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, if the council thinks it's wise to give the law director and auditor as the, you know, the structure had occurred up until now from 1976, some authority to settle claims, I think it would take, you know, I mean, your group's time is valuable too, considering maybe more important things, you know, not important, not that they're not important to these claimants, but more important things to the city.
So
let me tell you what I did. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
I wanted you to. I'm trying to get to a very clear, send this to the administration so we can say what we want as a committee and then be done.
Since December of 1976, the law director and the auditor have had the authority to pay up to $250 to settle claims. I don't think we've done that once in the 5 years almost that Keith Moore has been the law director and I've been his assistant. Because in most instances, these facts don't merit it. You know, that is, a pothole gets reported and the public works people fill it quickly. You know, or damage from a pothole is reported and the public works people fill it quickly. Having said that, I think the concept may make sense to, you know, kind of draw some of the littler stuff away from the committee. You know, if the committee's inclined to do that. And I kind of took what I looked up as kind of the average rate of inflation for over various decades and kind of applied it not in a compounded way, but in a simple inflation way, and came up with $1,000. Now, you know, the council can ordain any darn thing they want to. But I think that might be a valid number. You know, if the council wants to provide more authority, that's fine too. But I think that's worth looking at in part because this hasn't been changed now in 44 years. And I think it should, if the council wants to head in that direction.
Yeah, so here's the wording. I'll tweak it, but this is the concept, guys. It's for the three of you. First, the law department continues to manage in lockstep with the administration and department heads. A quarterly report, similar to what you just sent us, will still be submitted to the finance committee, just so we can have in case there's something that looks funny that one of us wants to bring forward, but it will just be that submission of a report. If a claim is greater than $1,000 and above a likely probability, that's in quotes because we will ask that the law department kind of do a highlight or maybe an asterisk or some sort of probability mark on the report to suggest that this is worth noting or this has a probability factor of likely or higher. If those thresholds exist, law department will highlight on the report to the finance committee and it will go through a formal review and approval by us, the four of us, okay? If anything on the report is below the $1,000 threshold or above a likely probability, we suggest the support from the administration. We suggest the law department receive support from the administration in some sort of triage capacity. But that last bit is simply a recommendation, and we're not telling the mayor what to do. We're just saying that that's probably a good idea. Is that fair for you guys? The three, I'm talking to the
Can
three
you
of
go
you.
into the threshold again, what you're referring to, other than financial, like the dollar amount? Was there another threshold as well?
Yep, I called it above a likely probability. And that would be noted on the report that, Mr. Gary or Mr. Moore gives us, that puts either an asterisk or some sort of indication that of this list, there's two of them that are above, $1,000. Either none of them have a probability that really warrant pursuing, or one of them kind of, the circumstances of that case goes, we should probably talk about that one.
Do you all have any comments on doing that, the probability part of it?
I'm a little reluctant to discuss probabilities of recovery in open session.
I see.
Because I just won't be as forthcoming as I would, in an attorney-client privileged
I understand.
scenario.
The intent for me is to try to whittle this down to something that we should actually be talking about, right?
Sure.
And so if I just put a threshold, the worry would be we're still receiving 5 of these a quarter. Because you said there's 2 right now, but it's summer, so.
Well, yeah.
Or is that just not a worry that I should be thinking of?
I don't think that's a concern.
Okay.
I don't think it ought to be necessarily. I do think that there could, if the council is inclined to delegate some authority to resolve these claims, I think raising the authority limit makes economic
sufficient.
sense and time sense for you guys.
Okay. All right, I'll scratch it.
But-
I'll just keep it at $1,000 and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
I'll write with you guys on copy, I'll write an email to the mayor and the law department saying this is what we hopefully see as a process that you guys can get on board with. And then as a committee, we'll just get them as they come, okay?
I mean, I don't think we've defended one of these in 5 years. One of the pothole type claims.
No.
By defended, I mean in court. But if if that comes to pass, by glory that comes to pass, and, we'll put on our evidence, and they'll put on their evidence, and some court will make a decision. But there may be ways to resolve some of these things as well as you might expect.
Okay.
We have nothing in suit that I'm aware of at this time that is kind of these, damage to car type stuff. We've got other claims that are in suit, that we're either supporting Insurance Defense Council in defending or actually defending ourselves. The largest one is one that we're defending ourselves because a prior council didn't have the good sense to keep insurance in place.
1980s council.
Yeah. No, yeah, not the last council.
Not the last council, yeah.
1987, 1988.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to tie a bow on this. Hopefully
Sure.
this works. And if you guys are good, I'll send the note and we'll be done.
And we'll have an ordinance at a future meeting, it sounds like.
That's fine unless somebody wants to tell me, raise it to 1,000 and be done with it.
I mean, is that I think that's what we're saying right now, is that, yeah.
That's what I was saying.
We're ready for an
Okay.
ordinance at the.
All right.
At a future council meeting.
Well,
Whenever you're available.
Future being Tuesday,
Well, if
maybe.
you're available to make it, I mean, tomorrow's the deadline, I mean, yeah. So,
Right.
Whatever y'all think,
It's not rocket science to change this one,
perfect.
okay?
So you will write an ordinance, you're saying?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. All right. Bo is tied from the Finance Committee. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Lastly is next steps for Rita. We, if you guys remember, heard as a committee as a whole, a presentation from Rita. This was at the Norwood Gym School when we were all kind of early stages of COVID. They called in via Zoom and we had a few takeaways. I asked those there's follow-up questions and they responded. So I'll kind of get into what they responded with, but just to state the intent of this last kind of agenda item, I want us to hopefully agree or at least come to some sort of like recommendation to council. So if we all agree, that'd be ideal. If one of us doesn't, we'll think of a way to present, but I want to come with a recommendation to general council on what we, the finance committee, think we should do about Rita. Got it? Cool. So Rita did their presentation, and they came back, and this was sent to all of us, by the way, from Ken Miracle, but it was a while ago, so fair enough if you don't have it in front of you. And they kind of did two things. The first thing they showed us was a response to a question that I asked when I said, well, I kind of understand generally this is going to cost us about $300K a year, which is about 1.5% of collections. But do costs escalate, and at what rate? So if it's $300,000 today, is next year $350? Is next year $400? Well, obviously there was no way for them to lock themselves down on that, but I did ask for some comparisons. So they gave me the past 4 years. I don't have the municipalities. It just says municipality A, municipality B, municipality C, and they show the collections, and they're all within, a $15 to $20 million collections, which is pretty close to us. So I thought they were fair. And what they showed was the cost of collections actually went down to the tune of 0.06% per year. So they did not escalate. In fact, they de-escalated, I guess is the right say. The costs go down. So that was a surprising result, and I think a selling point for Rita is that they're not going to tell us their costs will never, that, a cost of services don't go up. They're kind of showing us, well, here's what happens, here's what's been happening for the past 4 years. I thought that was an interesting piece of information. The other question that I had for them was, other than what's the cost of the services, which came out to about $300K a year, what are the other services that they were talking about? And a sheet was provided to us that talks about subpoena programs, legal programs, delinquency programs, and these all had varying sources of, I guess it's additional or incremental collections to the tune of $400,000 to $500,000 a year, in addition just to the normal services that they expected to collect for municipalities, the same municipalities A through H. So we may not need, or maybe we could trial just their standard offering of, of services, but they just provided other services that were, or could be provided as part of Rita's compliance programs. And lastly, they were giving e-service stats. Now, it really just was telling us how many e-file form counts were for those same municipalities. But I don't know if that really told us anything other than it seems like above 70, I did quick math, above 75% of the collections made from those same A through H municipalities or example municipalities came via e-filing. So I suppose that stat just tells us that people e-file a lot. And that since we don't really offer that, it could be a cool thing that we give our residents. Yeah. And it sounds like people will use it. So those are the three things that I had as follow-up. They responded, and I think it's really just, do we want Rita here? It feels like this is net good for us. It feels like that they bring in way more than they cost, and that the risk of costs increasing is low, and e-filing is a cool service, and people seem to be using it. So those are the things that I wanted to tell you guys from what I'm thinking, what I'm seeing, and just asking, what do you guys think?
You might have already said it, and I missed it, maybe when I was typing, but what was did you say an amount that these similar municipalities got extra?
Yes.
From using Rita, like what they brought in as revenue?
Yes, I did. I'm gonna get it. So they increased, municipality A increased $1.8 million. Municipality B increased, I'm doing math kind of as I go, sorry, 4.8 or 4.9. Municipality C increased $300,000. Municipality D increased $4.2 million. So it varied, but it seems like more than 300,000 was the takeaway. And that was probably what they were getting at. Again, these were, I can email, if they were emailed to you, but I can email again. It's really, I asked a question of, give me your sales prop, and this is what they responded
So
with.
we could look at an average about, probably about $1 million more a year.
It feels like, yeah, it feels like that. There's no way for them to guarantee it, but they were giving us ballparks.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, there's so many, just from the service standpoint, I think it's almost, we've really got to look at it. But from the additional revenue as well, yeah, I think there's a huge potential. I mean, just the fact that they're going to have access to so much more data than we do now,
Sure.
especially their partnership with the IRS. So they're going to be able to basically know for people that file with an address in Norwood, they're going to be able to get some information on their filing, potentially how much, what the not W-2, but what the total taxable income was. There's more data they're going to get because they've got the ability to do it. And we don't have those kind of partnerships here at the city of Norwood, our own treasurer's office. So I think that there's a ton of opportunity there. And yeah, frankly, I'm hopeful that the, treasurer would potentially support that or support helping to move forward with that, because it doesn't eliminate too, we all know, it doesn't eliminate the treasurer's office because they still have
Sure,
receipts
exactly.
to come in. There's other income that comes in that doesn't go through, Rita's just earnings tax, the income tax. So we'll still have the treasurer's office, we're going to still have the tax commissioner, but it's really, like I said, it's just finding some of those additional dollars. Probably some of the people that live in like One Rookwood or that don't really understand that you have to come down and file your earnings taxes at the treasurer's office. So yeah, I agree with what you all are saying, and to look forward further. And, I do agree that maybe we start out with the basic services, but if you think that, look, there's this add-on service that we should probably add at the same time, I mean, I'm definitely willing.
Let's just, my take would be, they provided that to us as part of, I asked for it, I said, give me your sales pitch sort of thing. I would say that, let's see how it goes. The value prop exists just with basic services and e-filing. And I think that should be the recommendation from us to council.
And having the e-filing option might, bring in more revenue.
It didn't seem like that's not a revenue generating thing. That's like a service offering.
Well, it definitely offers the ease of use for.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely, it improves the experience that our citizens go through.
Well, I think what I was going to, that was, the point to even have Rita was that they can do a better job of finding taxes that aren't being paid, tax revenue that we're losing versus hiring more people in that tax department or treasurer's office to do that job, so.
I'd agree.
Yeah, and that's why I like it.
Yeah, and then, okay, so just one thing, so just so people at home know too, I mean, RETA, it's, I think it stands for Regional Income Tax Authority.
Yeah.
And so essentially, it's not a public agency, but the Board of Trustees are all public officials, right, at cities across Ohio. So it's focused on Ohio. It was a setup basically to help solve this complex issue of like collecting earnings tax for all these small municipalities. So it's not like it's a company that's could come in and just jack up everybody's rates, right? I mean, there's a fairness aspect to it that, they're doing this shared service thing for, municipalities all across Ohio, and they have a board of trustees. So it's definitely something that, it's a lot, I feel a lot better at than just go into some collections agency, right?
Sure.
That could potentially do something, but, these people are the experts at it. They do it all over the place. So one of the reasons why we consider going there.
Sounds like we're all kind of saying, hey, let's report, in our report out, let's say the finance committee is recommending either a pursuit agreement with RETA.
Yeah, and I'd be curious too, the time frame. So like, do we have to sign like a 5-year contract? Do we sign is it just a year-by-year basis? I mean, if it's just if it's a 4-year contract that's renewable, I don't know. I mean, it's a lot easier to swallow than signing a 25-year, agreement. I'm sure it's not 25 years, I'm just saying.
Right. I definitely have reservations, but I'm curious to see where this takes, so I'm in support.
Yeah,
I'm in support of this, but I do have some reservations that I think I'll just let it unfold.
Yeah, and the good thing too, so Rita has, they've got customer service, people that you can talk to. I'm looking at their phone hours, but they don't have an office near us, but you can definitely still call them and talk to them and get help and such. And then I think that you have like an online account too, so that you can see the taxes you've submitted and such. Yeah, they have My Account, so. There's definitely some benefits for the citizens, just having some transparency on, I think just filing, potentially how long it takes to get the checks cashed and things like that, so.
I'm going to say, we, the Finance Committee, recommend the administration enter into agreement for collections and e-filing services. We are curious as to the terms, years, that this agreement would be, I'll add, would an agreement. We are curious to the terms, years, the agreement
The time commitment.
would hold to, but would ask the administration to consider that carefully. Is that cool, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then that gives the opportunity for the other 3 council members, if they really aren't in support, they can voice that, but otherwise, at least the president of the council and the mayor will know what the finance committee thinks. Those are the agenda items. I think the only thing that's clearly needs to be brought to the next finance committee meeting would be a follow-up on the 2 TIFs, which I'll try to get a better understanding, specifically a memo for that second one, the Rookwood TIF. But other than that, the open items, I'll make sure is in the report. The claims process, I'll document and make sure is in an email to the administration, including the law department. And then the discussion on Rita, I'll just put it, again, in my report, a note or maybe a letter to the mayor stating the finance committee wishes to recommend that.
Awesome. No, that's great. I'm just curious about just overall budget process as we move forward. Are you receiving, at this point, are departments submitting their 2021 proposed budgets?
So actually, funny, Tom Perry actually sent me a bunch of budgets. I think that they are doing that present tense because they seem to be half done. So I think the departments are submitting the budgets to the auditor and the mayor right now.
Okay.
Or have been in the past couple of weeks, just because they seemed like they were being worked on.
Yeah, that was kind of like a follow-up from when we talked about this at the financial analysis meeting. I just didn't know if you had like a timeline of when are we going to meet to look at them, or what's your kind of goal as we look to set the appropriations for 2021?
I suppose I didn't have a great one. I just know that we were going to have to be talking about the plan in December with Jim. But I think what you're asking is, independent of that, should we be looking at the budgets to make sure that the appropriations from the plan match the need of each budget? Is I'm saying that right?
Essentially. So, we'll just have to, I would say at the first meeting in November, we probably want to have an ordinance on the book to do the 2021 appropriations. So that way we don't have to pass it all at one meeting. We can let it simmer, if you will, let people know what the budget's going to be, the appropriations are going to be. Now, we know, since we're in fiscal emergency, that it essentially has to match the fiscal recovery plan for the funds that are in fiscal emergency. So, but there's other funds as well, and then that could be altered, right? The appropriations don't have to match any preset number, as well as there could be an identification that, oh my gosh, maybe we need to change the plan for some reason. I don't think we're going to get to that point. I don't think any department's going to submit some surprise. There's been a lot of good communication, it looks like, all around.
Okay.
But yeah,
I will think on that, and
yeah,
I'll put a plan together for the next meeting, okay?
Sounds good.
So 1, 2, 3. That's it for me, guys. I think I'm all checked off. Cool. Anything else?
That's it. Nice work.
Thanks.
All right.
Cool. Thank you.
Great.